obviously a magnificent movie. I like to start maybe with two questions. I think it's an astonishing movie because of, for me, two main reasons. The one is the work that you're doing with this movie to regain the real history for well, the struggles today, and I assume that it's also a big work for rebuilding the consciousness about how to end this kind of violence coming from the Western governments. And I think the second reason is that, as it is stated at the end in this movie, to show how this coup in Iran is an example for everything that happened afterwards in many countries. I gave you this badge that we made for the peace movement here, just naming some of the countries that suffered the same destiny. So my two maybe opening questions would be, first, what drove you to do this movie? Obviously it was like 9 years of work, intensive work, going through all the archives, contacting all the people, meeting them, and well, this investigation work. So where does this motivation come from? Maybe the first question. And the second question would be, you mentioned in the beginning that there are a lot of obstacles this movie faces, and maybe you can tell us more about this and what you assume that the reasons are. I mean, obviously we have to deal with all the lies about NATO fighting for freedom and democracy, and obviously the happenings in Ukraine have a big similarity to what is shown in the movie today. So that's the second question.
Okay, thank you for that. I have to say, I've sat down with a lot of audiences watching the film. You were a very, very engaged and responsive audience. You got angry in the right places, you laughed in the right places. I felt you feeling the film. So that was great. If it's useful, let's us answer the first question later. It will be useful for Walter and I to explain some of the history of this film, both during production and after its release. I will take you to all the way to the finishing of the film, from when it started to the finishing, and then Walter could perhaps tell you what happened after it came out, from his experience of working on lots of films for over 50 years. This film had no official source of funding. Every funding organization that documentary makers like me go to turned us down. Everybody rejected us. In the States, in the UK, in Europe, everywhere. A Hollywood studio came in with the offer of a huge part of the budget and then pulled out and disappeared. And that's why it took 10 years, because the money kept running out and we had to shut down production for me to go and raise money. The money was raised almost dollar by dollar in donations from individuals. I literally had to go shaking the can for money, and when it ran out, we would close down the production, close down the cutting room, put everything in storage. The team will go home, and bless them, to their credit, most of all to Walter's credit, they were offered lots of other work, but they didn't take them, they stayed until we came back. And it finally was made, finished, so to speak, in 2019. It started in 2009. And there was an upside to the delay and the lack of funding. It gave us a lot of time to do a lot more research, to dig deeper, and to find stuff that nobody else had found, which is what you've just seen. What happened after its release, and today is a very significant date, by the way, 31st of August is a very important date in the life of Coup 53, because it was exactly 3 years ago on the 31st of August 2019 that the film had its world premiere at the Telluride Film Festival in America. And Walter, maybe you want to say what happened since?
Yes. Coup 53 is the best reviewed film of all of the films that I've worked on, including Godfather and Apocalypse Now and The English Patient. It's one of only 109 films in the history of cinema that have more than 40 mainstream reviews and no negative reviews across the political spectrum, which Taghi and I certainly did not expect. So we got rave reviews from the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times and to the Daily Star, the communist newspaper in England, and everybody in between, the Daily Mail. Anyway, the paradox and the mystery, which is still a mystery today, is that with all of the great reception that the film had, no distributor would touch it. After the screening that Taghi just mentioned on the 31st of August 2019, the head of Sony Classics, who was in the theater, said, "Terrific film. Let's talk on Monday when I get back to New York." And the result was nothing. The word is ghosted. He turned into a ghost. He ghosted us. And that has been repeated over and over again. People get very enthusiastic about the film, and then something happens. And they not only don't distribute the film, they don't even talk to us about why they didn't distribute it. There's no silly excuse like, oh, our methods have changed and we love the film, but it's just nothing. And this has been the situation for the last 3 years, basically. We wound up distributing the film ourselves through video on demand, in linking up with, I think, 118 theaters in the United States and Great Britain, the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Canada, and similarly got fantastic reviews, and lots of people loved the film. And it was gaining momentum when we were threatened with a lawsuit for defamation by the makers of the film End of Empire. And there are many clips of interviews from their film. And their disagreement with us was that a cameraman in our film says, "Yes, I shot Norman Derbyshire at the Savoy Hotel," and the historical advisor says there was a version with Norman Derbyshire in the film, and then it had to be removed. And they say this is not the case, that no film was ever shot of Norman Derbyshire, and therefore it couldn't have been removed. And they're sensitive about this because they claim their reputation as honest filmmakers is damaged by our film. The fact that they would collapse under government pressure is the implication of several interviews in our film. Our film itself doesn't make any statement one way or the other about this. We interview, as you have seen, we interview Alison Rupert on camera, who says we never shot Norman Derbyshire. And the director of the film, who also says, interestingly, I don't think he was in the program. Uh, and then we have the testimony of other people. Anyway, enough of that has happened that it makes us slightly paranoid about what is happening behind the scenes to cripple such an interesting film that has gotten such great reception, and that, as you have said, here in Hamburg is very important in terms of understanding what the process is and what the long-term effect of all of this has been over the last almost 70 years.
Thank you, Walter. Two very important things, and then I'll answer your first question, why did I make this film? I think it's abundantly clear why the film had to be made, but I will explain why. The first important thing is that to this day, to this hour, the British government, the British state, has not admitted officially to its role in the coup. There's never been an admission of British involvement of their part in this coup. Second, nobody disputes that Coup 53 is the only documentary that puts the Norman Derbyshire transcript on the screen in great detail using the brilliant performance of Ray Fiennes. The information in that interview has never been in a documentary like it has just been shown to you in Coup 53. So put those two things together. The people who threatened to sue us never sued us. They simply threatened to do it. They never even went to lawyers and sent us an official lawyer's letter. They simply went to the press and social media saying they were going to sue us for defamation. And the other claims they make on behalf of our film, and anyone with a very basic film school 101 understanding of film will know, watching our film, that nowhere does Coup 53 claim to be the first to reveal the role of MI6 and CIA. Nowhere does it claim to be the first to reveal that MI6 were involved in the coup, because it's there in the film. It's not made a big deal of. The thing that we say in the commentary and throughout the film that we claim that turns the story inside out is to say Roosevelt was a bagman, he was an exaggerator, he was a stealer of limelight, and he grabbed credit for the coup. The Americans took all the credit. But in fact, the engine, the mastermind, the brains, the operations were all MI6, and it was Norman Derbyshire. And that's what our film puts on the screen for the first time. And why did I make the film? I grew up with the story of the coup. As an Iranian, the coup is in your DNA. You're almost fed it, with your mother's milk, I think. If you were born, after the 50s, I was born in 1960. So it was inevitable that one day I would have to deal with the story that's shaped not just the country's history since 53, it's shaped my life, it's affected millions of people's lives. And I was never ready. As a filmmaker, I'd made some 36 television documentaries. Looking back on it now, they were just a warm-up before I could tackle something like this. And even then, when I started making this film, it was completely beyond my skills and my capabilities. I learned by doing it. I was not ready to make a feature documentary. I am obviously the world's luckiest documentary maker because Walter Murch joined me to help me make the film. So it wouldn't have been made without Walter. And so Goddard said, you don't make the film makes you. So Coup 53 made me. And you've already said why it's relevant, why it's important historically. There is no point in making a history documentary or history film or doing anything of a historical nature unless it has a relevance and a resonance to the now, to the here and now. And I don't think anyone can dispute that everything in Coup 53 is happening now, has been happening for decades. Harry Truman said, there is nothing new in the world except a history you do not know. And that's why I made the film. and now we go home.
So I would open the microphone to you. If you have questions, just raise your hands. Franziska will bring you the microphone.
I have one question, but I want to point out three things about the film that I like. I want to point out three things about the film I like very much, and then I have one question. First of all, I think very important is to see that everything is there. You just have to want to see it, and I think it's a very important thing to know. It's hard work, I can see, to dig deep, but everything is there, and it needed someone to put the parts together. The second thing I liked was that you used the vanity of these guys because they have a special understanding of history, that great men make history. And they think they are great men, so they want to talk about that they are great men. And you use that very good. But I think it's important to see that history is still made by people, and a film like this is important to see that not great men but people make the history. So we have to see the film to know that. The third thing I forgot, so I have the question also to Walter Murch. What moved him to do this film? He's a very well-known cutter for very famous films, and I think you will have problems to do further films, because I think I just the third thing is it means so much, because for actual wars it's so important that we are the good ones and they are the bad ones. So to show that those who tell those are the bad ones are really the bad ones, and I think that's why the film is so dangerous. And I think when you put yourself in danger by doing such a film, because you might get problems, obstacles for further films, you must have a very strong motivation. So I wanted to ask Walter Murch what his motivation was to do this. He hasn't roots in Iran, but in the US, in Great Britain, I think, or USA. So you are a part of the other side by nationalism. All right, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I met Taghi in New York in 2012, so 10 years ago, and I was then finishing up another documentary, another feature documentary on the search for the Higgs boson at CERN in Geneva. The film is called Particle Fever. It's a wonderful film. You can find it on YouTube and other places. And Taghi graduated in physics from Nottingham University. And when he heard that we were making the film, he wanted to see it. And he came to see our latest version of it. It was still in progress at that time. And we struck up a relationship. And much of the money, the independent money that he was just talking about, came from California, from Silicon Valley. And my wife and I live just north of San Francisco, so he would come and stay with us and go down to Silicon Valley and shake his can. He would come back and we would count the pennies, and then off he would go. But I didn't think I would work on the film, but I found myself at loose ends after a big Hollywood film had finished. And my wife and Taghi put their heads together and said, what Walter needs now is a change of pace. And my wife is English, by the way. Let's go to London and work on this documentary for 6 months, a year, maybe. And one thing led to another. I knew about Mossadegh because I had edited Sam Mendes's Jarhead in 2005 about the first Gulf War. And I had read up about the history of oil in the Middle East. And of course, Iran was the first country in the Middle East to discover that it had vast reserves of petroleum. And so I was already interested in the subject. And then once we got going, it just kept going. I'm a person who, when he signs onto a film, agrees to do a film, I don't let go. I keep with it at whatever the cost of time is. And this, as Taghi said, this turned into actually a 5-year project, because the film was technically done in 2019, but then the next year when we released the film, it had this lawsuit, and we had to go through all kinds of legal issues to save the film from being irreparably damaged by the forces who were working against it. We prevailed because we are the good guys, yes. But it was a lot of additional work that went on. And, you may be right. I may never work on another film again, but this is certainly a very good film to end my career on.
You may have just watched the most dangerous documentary ever made, and we're very proud of that. Everything that's happened to Coup 53 since its release is as crazy and surreal and weird as what's in the film. And it in itself, it has the making of another film. And so I just say, watch this space. So next question.
Yeah, thanks also from my side for letting us learn today. And I love your humor, I want to say that, especially as it was shown that the coup in Iran was some sort of kickoff for changing of governments. What I would like to know is, we already heard something about that great man obviously love to talk about what they did, but what about the response? Are they working together with Iranian people? I mean, obviously you have also filmed in the Iran, as it looks like it, and it might have been of some danger for so-called ordinary people. So how did that work? And what is today's response in the Iran? I presume it's not shown officially, but is it handed over under the counter?
So two things are going to surprise you a lot. Thank you for the note about humor. I think it's not worth doing unless there's some humor. I think even in Coup 53 there's some humor, which I'm very, very happy with. The first thing is, when we had the Telluride premiere, after the screening, there were 2 screenings, both sold out. The second screening was sold out, and there were 43 people outside waiting to get in, and they couldn't get in. I counted them all. But in the audience was somebody you all know, Werner Herzog. And as soon as the film finished, he told Walter and me, this is going to be big. This is big, and it's going to be very big. So it has the kind of German seal of approval. The other thing I noticed that in his dying days, Mossadegh gets to have his final car ride in a VW in Tehran, as you see in Farhad Diba's uncle's car. And I also noticed in the animation, after he's died and they're whizzing him back to his village, he's actually been driven back to his village in a VW bus. These are just things that occurred to me tonight for the first time. The film is on release in Iran. It has been shown. You can watch it in Iran now. Iranians love it. It went into 2 festivals. In 2020, it won the Audience Award at the Cinema Verite Documentary Festival, which is the biggest documentary festival in Iran. It won the Audience Award. It then went on to go into the main international Faj Film Festival, the 39th Faj Film Festival, and it won the Crystal Phoenix for Best Documentary, after which it went on release online, and it was in cinemas, and it's still screened. Iranians love it, and it's not under the carpet. It's under the British carpet.
With no editing. There was no censorship of the film.
And there's nothing cut in the film, so that was a condition of my agreeing for it to be screened, no cuts. Audiences everywhere love the film. British audiences in real cinemas, when we were screening, always packed houses, gripped, and many come very emotional and say how moved they were. Some say they're very embarrassed about what their government did. The same with Americans. A lot of Americans come and say, we had no idea. As we say in the narration near the beginning, for a lot of Americans, Iran really didn't exist until 1979. There was, Iran starts 79, revolution, hostage crisis. It wasn't on the radar before. We say, no, let's go back to 53. Let's put everything in context. So that's it.
Hello. I try to speak in English, but my English is not so good. Excuse. Just my question is, before you misunderstand my question, I'm from Russia, and thank you very much for the film. Maybe it's for me not something new, because I'm the whole time in this political context. I know a lot about this investigation journalism, about Julian Assange. He told us, no, not he, but his work told us also a lot of stuff. There is Americans and England involved in some crimes. My question is a bit philosophical, a bit like, it was mob from CIA and in our agency, whatever. But it was a mob, and a lot of people who were bought from make this mob. Yeah, we make for Shah, and why people didn't support the Mossadegh? Why people didn't support? Why people lived so long under the Shah? Why people went to the streets? Maybe not all for money and say, I'm for Shah. The question is because, it's my question because I am from Russia, and I think it can happen also in Russia now. But some military people say, okay, we don't like Putin, we make it something like military putsch. And a lot of people maybe will also do it because I don't know why. You understand my question? What was inside of the country, inside of the people, inside of these people who support this military putsch? Because maybe these people also were from poor relationship. They got some money from. You understand what I mean a bit? I mean, what is our hope if some group of people have a weapon? What can we do?
I think what I understood your question to be is, why didn't people come out against the Shah? You're talking about the day of the coup. The important thing to bear in mind is that the crowd that was on the street that day was a renter mob. Most of them were paid to be there. Mossadegh either was fooled or misled by the American. That's not in the film, but in the archive. Mossadegh was advised by the American ambassador, who was out of the country in the lead up to the coup. When the coup failed, he flew back immediately because they decided they have to deal with him now. Basically, Mossadegh has won, so they have to now deal with him. He flies back, and on his way back from the airport to Mossadegh's house, he sees a huge crowd in support of Mossadegh on the street, protesting and being very angry, shouting "Death to America." Death to America was born in 1953. There are banners in photographs that you see says "Death to America" back in 1953, and people very angry against America because of that. The first failed attempt, they were attacking American cars and whatever was happening. Henderson says to Mossadegh, if you're going to deal with you, Mr. Prime Minister, you have to restore law and order. You have to get people off the street. And so, and Mossadegh was a man of law and order, and he didn't want chaos. So he does actually send a message through his connections. He actually calls newspaper editors, puts adverts in the newspaper saying to people, please stay at home, don't come out, let's keep order. And that happens to be the day on which everyone stays at home and the renter mob come out. That's only a few thousand people. And those are the people who are basically staging the coup. It was a theater of coup. It was, and for decades after the 1953 coup, the Shah convinced himself and told everybody this was a national uprising. Even as recent as last week, there are Iranian monarchists on Twitter celebrating the day of the coup as a national uprising, even now. That's how deluded they are. So I don't know if that answered your question, but those people who were on the street were hungry people, but they were simply out there, as the man says. They were just a renter mob. They would have done anything if they were, with a lunch ticket and some money. And so there was no ideology in that crowd.
I would just also add that because of the embargo on Iranian oil, which was in place for more than a year, the economic situation in Iran was, as it is today, getting very serious. And, people want stability. They want to be able to feed their family. And so there was a certain group of people in Iran who didn't want Mossadegh. They said he just causes problems. And most significantly, the army was, by and large, against Mossadegh. His main supporter in the army, Afshartus, as you see in the film, was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered. And the other members of the army, General Zahidi, took over, and an army that can control over 20 tanks assaulting the prime minister is a strong force. And what we know about coups from experience is that they're sometimes very subtle. That the coup happens and ordinary people almost don't know that it has happened. And to a certain extent, that was something of the case in Iran in 1953. And, the Shah the Shah was the king. He was a constitutional monarch, so he continued. It wasn't as if they brought in a new king. It's just that he had much more power now than he had before. So the coup would not have succeeded if there was not some support from Iranians to support the coup.
And there was the army factor was important because the year before, on the 21st of July uprising, when Mossadegh resigned and then he came back due to popular demand, the Shah's army did open fire and kill people. And when Mossadegh got back into power, he sacked a lot of the army officers. So there was this very disgruntled, resentful, retired army officers who formed a core group of army officers who then became part of the coup plotting team. So there was disaffected army officers, there was the renter mob, and that's what we had.
Well, I think it's a very important question because we also discussed it in several different occasions, considering the coup in Chile, why it could succeed. I think one important issue is that the circumstances under which the Mossadegh government tried to forward all these wide-range process of social reforms and everything had to happen on a basis of not a real established democratic system. So there was no, in the film it was mentioned, he was the mostly educated person, maybe this time in Iran, having studied abroad with the doctor in law. So the education level was probably very, very low throughout the whole population. The second thing that was mentioned, the Communist Party was a very strong force in ideological terms, but they didn't have a real mass basis. And also, I don't know if that's correct, but I read it in the articles in preparation for the movie that the electoral system didn't even consider electoral rights for everyone. It was a class system of elections. So the whole politicization level was maybe not very high throughout the whole population. So you can't call out to the people to get on the streets in order to defend your politics in such a situation. I think that's a big problem. That obviously it's not the fault of this government because it's caused by the historic circumstances. But maybe it's necessary to learn in order to understand what is the what are the bases that need to be created in order to re-establish some similar process without opening the opportunity to the evil forces to overthrow it again.
I mean, that's an important point. He had several things, the odds stacked against him. One was he was elected on two tickets of nationalizing Iranian oil and reforming the elections, reforming parliament. The Iranian parliament was corrupt and not really connected to the democratic process in dialogue with the people. A lot of them were actually bribed by the British to do their bidding. There wasn't a very educated civil society in contact with the democratic process with the parliament. The media, the newspapers, which was the really main media at the time, was also bought and putting out propaganda against him. The economy was deliberately crippled because of the sanctions. In fact, we have it in the film. The more the economy suffers, the more disgruntled people will get, and they will blame the government. So, you make them poor, they will hate the government, they would blame the government. So he had all these things going on. He had the disgruntled army officers against him, and some of his own allies turned against him. So in that situation, the house of cards was inevitably going to collapse. But as Walter said, mob mentality, crowds are very, very difficult to read. Even if you're in a crowd, I can be in a crowd on the street. I've been on protest. You're only aware of what's happening in your own radius of 5 or 6 meters. You can never know what's happening to the huge mass. And it's only later do you realize what really happened on that day in that street, when you see the pictures, when you hear lots of different accounts. And certain things have to fall into place for it to succeed, and it's unpredictable. In fact, Kermit Roosevelt said, when he was asked to take part in another coup, he said, well, there are certain magic ingredients. If they're not in place, you're not going to get a coup. And he knew the formula. And so that formula is very delicate, and things have to fall into place.
And also the coup almost did not work. The CIA believed that they had lost, and so they were telling Kermit Roosevelt and others to get out of the country. And it was Norman Derbyshire operating remotely from Cyprus by radio who turned the tide. So it almost could have, as I said earlier, it's sometimes a very delicate thing what happens.
Just allowed me a small joke about the democratic processes. To that time, then United States of America and England were involved in our process of political process in Iran. Their democracy involved bureaucracies. England and the United States of America and the elected the culture of election, whatever, I don't know what is the name of it in English, they were involved in our process, political process, in our country, in this, in this cruel, how can I say, cruel methods.
I think democracy is sick and it's broken, and you've seen what democracy produced in America. You saw what democracy produced in the UK with Brexit. It needs a lot of attention because it's been abused. I hope, but by saying what was happening in Iran, I wasn't praising the current system in the West, or at least in Britain. Democracy in Britain gave us Boris Johnson. So, incidentally, because we just mentioned Brexit, I think Brexit is definitely a direct result of the empire falling apart. Finally, I think the empire is breaking up in their minds, and the result is this toxic Brexit.
Yeah, I have. Oh, do you want something to ask? Oh, okay. Yeah, I have one question about the media in Iran. In 1953, in the movie you could see that there was like different anti-methods against the former president, Dr. Mohammadi. I hope I spoke that directly out. And my question is, how does fake news also involved in the riots? So has it like a big effect, or had that a big effect on the riots? Or was it like a side note of just these riots and hadn't really a big impact of that riots? Sorry, again, no, because the movie you could see that the news outlets in Iran was bribed, and also the CIA wrote fake news about the President Mohammadi, I think it's his name, and Musadin, sorry. And my question was about if like this fake news had also a big role in the riots we could see then when the coup came in 1953.
Is your question about the media?
Yes, the media, right. If that had a big role like the fake news that was written.
Okay, so there wasn't media as such. There was only one radio station. The rest was just newspapers and magazines. And not everybody had a radio, and so there wasn't any television of any kind. And the radio was highly controlled. Most of the time it was actually putting out agricultural news and price of wheat, or that kind of thing. And occasionally it would actually broadcast Mossadegh's speeches, either recorded or live from parliament. So that was the only media, really. The newspapers, there was a window of freedom when Mossadegh was giving freedom even to newspapers who were criticizing him, but this clearly was open to abuse. And when the editors were bribed, they would write whatever. And as you've seen in the film, if they couldn't get enough material, they would write, CIA would write it in Langley, and then through the Rashidian brothers, it would be translated overnight and appear in Iranian newspapers. There were, of course, pro-Mossadegh and nationalist newspapers. The most prominent was Bakhtar Emruz, as you see in the film, which was reporting, the events leading up to the coup and the aftermath. And incidentally, that was the newspaper whose offices were burnt down on the day of the coup, because the editor of that newspaper was Dr. Fatemi, who was not only the editor of the newspaper, he was also Mossadegh's foreign minister. That's how cool it was. He was a foreign minister and a newspaper editor. He was also the only cabinet member of Mossadegh's government who was executed. He went into hiding, and he was in hiding for many months until somebody blew his cover, and he was arrested and then executed.
Till hatte sich gemeldet, glaube ich. Ach so, Lukas auch. Sorry. Okay.
I try to be short, but there's so much to say to it. Thank you anyway for the movie. And it raises lots of questions. We're in times of war again. I mean, war is never far, but however, it's for me professionally, I have this educational and psychological background, and to me, it's the question if ever people will learn. And if you say somebody is educated or civilized, I mean, we live in the country of educated idiots. I mean, think of the Nazis, and so ironic that this general actually was a Nazi collaborator, and it's so strange how his son wondered if maybe Mussolini had syphilis. Well, maybe his father did after all this prostitution, consumption. But that's not the point, of course. I was remembering the movies of Joshua Oppenheim because it's so peculiar that the deed doers, that the bad guys love to talk and brag about it, whilst the victims, I probably suppressed the memory of he did 2 movies about the massacres in Indonesia, and I probably suppressed the name of the movie of the people who were the active pulling through the massacre winners, so to speak. But the other one, the Sound of Silence, is about the victims and so-called losers who actually are lacking words. And I wonder why you managed in a how can I put this, in a very amazing way to get these guys to talk or even brag and confess. Maybe it's a times and age matter. They didn't have anything to lose, and maybe with the distance, they were also wondering, how could I be so effective? How could this all, take so many turns and such? And I mean, it's a wondrous thing, but on the other hand, it's that these questions and this amazement and the shocking visuals and statements must lead to some sort of reflection and action in the end, because peace has a very bad standing. It's violence has always more force. You can't do therapy against violence. It's a totally weak position. I myself, as a psychologist, must see that I'm on the side of the dumb idiot losers. And that means that I can do nothing unless it's being political, or I have some access to political influence from private or media or political positions or artistic positions in that case. But of course, a documentary is a fabulous thing, and this movie is fantastic, but it's not enough. Certainly not. Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the reasons we managed to get the Zahedi's son, Ardeshir Zahedi, was because we had time, and he finally did agree to take part. I mean, I don't know whether he actually believed what he said about his role or his father's part in the coup, or having said the same things or having lied to himself for 50, 60 years, he came to believe it. He was very happy to give the interview, and it was important to have Iranian voices, and he was, at the time, he's now dead, he died last year, he was the last remaining coup plotter from the Shah side of the story that we could get to give the interview, and he ended up being the most important because he's the son of the general who, you know, ran the coup and became prime minister. Victors move on, they forget, but victims never forget. And it was important for this film to have a lot of Iranian voices so that we could hear from them. And I hope it's managed to do that. I cannot psychoanalyze posthumously after Mr. Ardashir Zahedi and what was going on with him and why you know, he almost was bragging, as you say, or he wasn't calling the coup. The thing is, as far as he was concerned, they were doing the right thing. I think when you talk about baddies and the goodies, the baddies don't ever think they're the baddies. I don't think any baddie thinks, I'm going out today to be a baddie and do bad things. They have justifications for what they do to believe they're right in what they do. That's my amateur psychoanalysis. I don't know.
Lukas, glaube ich, oder?
I need to say, I think that the film is much more than enough. I think it's actually hard to classify a movie like that in this category because I think the point is not to be enough, but to make a difference. And I think that the movie makes a real difference. I think it's, until now, I think it's hard to, let's say, anticipate or to measure what is the possibilities that this movie can achieve, let's say, because I think that this type of work, and I really appreciate that movie that shows precisely and with a lot of research, with a clearly but somehow implicit political view that must be implicit also. I don't know why. It doesn't must be, but I think that it makes also a lot of this film to show it as really a research result, let's say. But it's clearly, and for me at least, in the scene when the boxes start to show in the boxes from Iran, then I don't know, Guatemala, Bay of Pigs, Salvador Allende, and all of them, all the coups that USA did after, it's clearly the message, not only there is someone or ideology that is, let's say, in all of these cases. So we have this similarity, let's say, but also there is something that this ideology is against. And I think that's for me what it's most powerful. I can make it in concrete words. I come from Brazil and I learned, at least in the school and after that also much more, about the coup in 1964 against João Goulart, theoretically. And this example, but also Bay of Pigs and Salvador Allende was maybe the most progressive one of them, one of the scopes, are also, so 2 points at least. First point, they always need to invest a lot of time, a lot of personal, a lot of money, much more, and they need to really build a narrative to make this scope or to change a system and these things. And I think that USA as it is, or let's say the bad guys, they have much more the sense of how much energy they need to put to fight against let's say the real thing, the power to the people, that people really want to achieve, in the case of Iran, let's say sovereignty at least, or the power to decide their own destiny through democracy or something like that, until Salvador Allende, really a socialist or a humanist possibility for a country that also didn't have education and anything. So it's also a reaction against a possibility of a much better world. And this energy that they need to put, in my opinion, is much bigger than the energy that we have, let's say, as people, to make this action. So the action that they try to repress is much, I wouldn't say organic or spontaneous or is always there, but it also shows that it's much more powerful. And also to the question that Irina did, how can it be that people agree with this kind of government or just, let's say, do their daily life inside this type of governments and something like this? I think that you all need to see this contradiction, that a lot of energy is put there, but actually it always has the possibility this Wut, is that one Wut? This anger, let's say, or this from a positive side, will to a better word to repress it. And yeah, I think my question, seeing this point, is much more from the day that the movie released until now. What was the reception of this movie because of that? Because I think that things like that, research like that, so easily display, let's say, are very powerful in relation with this will to a better world. And that's why my question is, how is the reception until now? And we already have an answer in our case, very emotionally and also interesting, but I think that in other countries must be like that also. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, we can tell you about the reception of the film, and thank you for your analysis, and also thank you for saying that it's very difficult to define what the film is because it's so many things. The film critic of the Times in London, who gave the film 5 stars and wrote about it 3 times, including a very big article, in an interview with us, she finally ended up saying, "This is actually more than a film. This is not just a film. This is more than a film." The way it's connecting to audiences is always very gratifying for Walter and me. Right across Latin America, it's been to festivals in Argentina, it's been screened in Mexico, it's been screened in Ecuador and Brazil at a film festival where it was nominated for an award. The great thing is that people see their own history and their own experience in the film. There were 62 CIA coups after 1953, so a lot of countries have been there. They feel our pain, they understand it. So the reaction is people bring their own, they see themselves, they see their own country's history in the film. When it first came out, we advertised it on social media, and the posts were targeted to different countries. 3 countries were very, very responsive, the people in the number of views and the comments. India, because of obviously the British Raj and the control of India for at least 200 years. The Irish loved the film because of their experience of the English. So do the Scots, who want independence. And even right now, if you go to our social media, if you watch our Instagram or watch Twitter, read Twitter or Facebook, you see a lot of Scottish, Irish, and Indians shouting at the English. So that's the kind of reaction we get. And a lot of reviewers call the film a thriller. One critic called it a genre-bending film that you cannot define. So it echoes what you've just said, because it's this and this and this. I mean, it's a film that's an investigation, it's a history documentary, then it's a thriller, and it's got some animation, It does a lot of things that even, I still can't get. Tonight I saw it after a long time on a big screen, and I started noticing things that I hadn't seen before. Most of it is Walter's brilliant editing. But,
Till, glaube ich.
Yeah, I want to come back to the question of Irina, because I think where is the hope when democracy is attacked by the right or even by an imperialism power? And I think you're right, we cannot discuss what did they do wrong, what did Mossadegh do wrong. That's a moral question. I don't think it leads to anywhere. But what can we learn is very important. And I think you pointed out he was a man of order. And if democracy is attacked by the right or by an imperialism power, it's not enough to defend democracy. You have to develop to a new quality, I think, is very important to learn. So if you had Trump, it's not enough to have Biden. You have to have, wie heißt er doch gleich, Sanders. I think it's a difference if Mossadegh calls people to come out to the street or tells them to go back home. And I think he overestimated himself and underestimated the power of the people because his bodyguard said he found it a nice idea to be killed as a matter. So I think he thought, when this happens, the people will come out to the street. So why don't he just cause them without dying by the bullets? So I think to develop the democracy when it's attacked by the right or by imperialism is very important to learn for today, that we have to come to a new quality in democracy and power of the people.
I think I've been told we have 5 minutes left. There's something I'd like us to talk about, and Walter talks about this much better than I do, and it's important because I know this is being recorded and it's good to have it on the record. And the word on the record is important. One of the things that the End of Empire team have said about the interview with Norman Derbyshire. They say they've never filmed him, and that's open to discussion depending on your take on what the interviewees in the film say. We have different accounts. But they also say that the interview did happen, it was audio, it was recorded, and it was off the record. Walter, would you like to expand on that?
Sure. By definition, if a secret agent allows himself to be recorded, it is on the record. No person like Derbyshire really speaking off the record would allow a tape recorder anywhere near him as he was saying things like he said. So the conclusion that I make, and I think any reasonable person makes, is that he was speaking on the record, because the opposite just can't be the case. The famous person Deep Throat, who provided the key information about Nixon in the Watergate. We didn't know who he was, and clearly no recording of him was ever made. So the idea that a secret agent confessing to the murder of an Iranian general and his involvement in that, to say that he spent the money on this, to make disparaging remarks about the head of the MI6 at the time, the fact that a recorder was taking all of this down means that by definition he was speaking on the record. You also have the testimony of his CIA counterpart, Stephen Meade, and you hear the interviewer, Alison Rupert, ask specific questions about Norman Derbyshire to Stephen Meade. If Derbyshire was really deeply off the record, she wouldn't have been able to do that. You just don't do that. We also have the original film of Stephen Mead, and there are many splices in it, which means to me, as a film editor, that pieces of Stephen Mead were in the film at one point talking about Norman Derbyshire. Well, if you have him talking about Norman Derbyshire, you have to have film of Norman Derbyshire talking about Stephen Mead. And Mead was a friend of Derbyshire's, and there's no way that a man like him would agree to go on the record if Derbyshire also was not on the record. So the argument that Derbyshire was not on the record is contradicted by many things that we have uncovered in the process of making the film.
So they say he wasn't filmed, and they say there was an off-the-record recording made of this interview as a research interview to guide them through other interviews that they were going to do with people on the record about the coup. Derbyshire's interview is one of the most explosive and revealing interviews anyone has ever given about the nitty-gritty of the coup. Some of the most explosive stuff in his interview are in our film. None of the things he says are in their film. We don't understand how his interview was used as a guide to bring out those points from other interviewees if none of that information ends up in their film. The assassination of the chief of police, the formation of SAVAK, the Ashraf mission, which is a critical mission in order to get the Shah to sign up, and so on. And the role of the BBC, he says, we use the BBC, that's not in the film. He says disparaging things about the chief of MI6, that's not in the film. So how did they use that off-the-record interview that was recorded to guide their interviews when none of the content is actually in their film?
For Walter, they used it to know what not to put in the film. That's what the comment from the public was. But unfortunately, I think we have to finish the discussion now. Thank you very, very much for coming and discussing this with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it really is a very, very dangerous film to a lot of people, and we can make a lot out of it and learn a lot from it. Thanks.
So again, I want to thank everyone here for coming, and thank you, Thomas and the team, for organizing the event and doing the subtitles. This film lives with the audience at the grassroots level. So if you're active in your community, if you're active on social media, talk about it, tweet about it, do whatever you need to tell people, get the word out. You are our distributors.